Sometimes, exploring means crossing the state to check out stonework over in Eastern Vermont. I'm author and researcher Mike Luoma, and I headed to Orange County, Vermont to an old but still functioning hill farm at the invitation of the retired farmer who's found potential indigenous stonework on his land. He's no longer working, but the farm is. It's now run by a young farmer. Its cattle range across 23 hillside and hilltop pastures, and what isn't open land is crisscrossed by the pipelines of a 5,000-tap sugaring operation. After retiring, the landowner began to look into explanations for the non-agricultural stonework he'd been finding on his farm's land over the last 45 years. And he discovered that it could be older indigenous stonework. Coming across my work, he asked if I'd like to come take a look. This first stone row, he pointed out, had some underlying indigenous features, but appeared to have been adapted and leveled out, tamed long ago. The previous owner had repaired about 15 feet of the stone row, the landowner told me, and it's likely we see older adaptations here as well. Is this indigenous stonework? Was it originally? Is probably a better question. The more we saw in this area, the more I thought it could have been. On the other side of the stone row, up a little ways, we find two stone piles. One of which has a small boulder deliberately perched on top of it. The perched boulder suggests there is more to these stone piles than first meets the eye. But these stone assemblages also point out the problem of context here on an old hill farm when assessing the origins of the stonework. Indigenous stonework in the Northeast, in the form of stone prayers, boulder features, cairn-like stone structures, and stone rows, have often been mistaken for the remnants of agricultural work. As the United South and Eastern Tribes, USET, wrote in one of their resolutions asking the federal government for help in safeguarding these sites, per the government's agreements with the federally recognized tribes, quote, whether these stone structures are massive or small structures, stacked, stone rows, or effigies, these prayers in stone are often mistaken by archaeologists and state historic preservation offices as the efforts of farmers clearing stones for agricultural or wall-building purposes. And archaeologists and state historic preservation offices categorically thereafter dismiss these structures as non-Indian and insignificant, permitting them to be the subjects of the sacrilege of archaeological dissection and later destruction during development projects. USET Resolution 2007-37. There are many intriguing stone features here, but given the farming context, indigenous origins may be hard to prove to skeptical archaeologists, state historic preservation types, and other critics. The landowner pointed out this cairn-like stone assemblage on the other uphill side of the farm road. It had a surrounded stone built into it. I thought it looked like part of something larger, though, now destroyed. It might be a continuation of the lower stone row, and it may be part of a longer structure, which led up to a short length of intact stone row a little bit further up the hill, off the edge of another pasture, which possesses some likely indigenous stonework features. This short, intact length of stone row appears to end in a zoomorphic head shape, a composite serpent head, or perhaps a tail. This is not traditional coarsework. We see surrounded stones and columnar stacked construction, designs often incorporated into indigenous stonework. It doesn't border a pasture or mark a boundary. This is some beautiful work. There is a sort of stone platform on the end going up to this quartz piece. Coming around, we can see more clearly undulations and fin work on top of the stone row. This is very likely an indigenous serpent effigy stone row. In another pasture, this next feature, a Cairn-like stone construct, seems to be some kind of observational structure. Though it was overcast and raining, according to the landowner, on clear days you can see quite a distance. You can see the New Hampshire mountains and some of the Green Mountains from up here. In checking for any alignments, it appeared there could be a potential winter solstice sunrise alignment with a nearby low peak. A preliminary check with Sunseeker shows we may be close to these lining up. If any might suggest this is only a clearing pile, the intention of the construction says otherwise. Plus, it's uphill. No, it's not a clearing pile. Too many assumptions about old farming stonework seem to be made by academics and officials without actual agricultural experience. And yet, their false assumptions go on to create popular public myths about the stonework. One of the most popular and prevalent myths is that Vermont's tens of thousands of miles of stone walls were built for sheep farming over some 30 to 40 years in the 1800s. But the retired farmer showing me non-agricultural stonework he'd found on his farm told me his sheep knock down stonework and walk over low stone rows here. It does not seem likely sheep farmers built all these old stone rows, no matter what you've heard. There is more stonework above this. We can see these lookout stones from the end of a potential stone serpent above. A serpentine line of small boulders leads from this vantage point above the lookout stones, the lookout, over to an intriguing mass of boulders. This doesn't look like anything now, but it may have been a stone spiral or stone platform of some kind, before being agriculturally impacted. A potential frog effigy sits nearby. It seems propped up in front, creating a niche, potentially for offerings. And we see a few stones remain on the top, potentially donation stones. This stonework was eye-catching. A semicircular cairn-like stone structure on the roadside, a little further along one of the paths. Was there more to this before this farm road was pushed through? The landowner doesn't remember now, 40-some-odd years later, but it's possible. This possible stone prayer sits nearby, next to a spring-fed pool. This stone assemblage resembles many stone prayers I've seen, and its proximity to water adds to the evidence it could be a stone prayer. The landowner told me that the spring here is steady year-round, even kept going during a recent drought. We hiked up the hills to see this undulating boulder row. Curiously, this higher altitude stone row is made up of some of the largest stones used to build the stone rows on these hills. Took some effort to get these up here. These are huge stones, like human torso-sized, 3 feet long at least, a couple feet wide. Big. And undulating, arcing up and down the hills. I noticed this stone row also featured a perched, projecting wing or fin stone, likely placed to accentuate the serpent effigy potential. I've noted these sorts of wing or fin stones added to stone rows, possible indigenous stone rows, across New England. Unless you stop to examine it closer, you might simply assume it's a fallen stone from the stone row, if you just glanced at it. Small details like this speak volumes, don't they? The undulating boulder row ends at the crest of the hill. If it once picked up on the other side, it's no longer organized. But there are stones here, and a curiously perched boulder. Coming around, we see a short, simple stone row ending in a large stone, a possible serpent's head. And of course, the larger boulder is perched above it. We saw this interesting stone assemblage at a lower altitude, on a low rise. The dimple in the rock on this side reminds me of depictions of singing mouths I've seen in some indigenous stonework. We may see a face in profile from this side, looking up to the left. Coming up and around this stone is very revealing. It turns out to be a sort of split-filled rock feature. There are small stones filling the gap between the larger stones. And that gap looks like a big open mouth, doesn't it? This bears a resemblance to a frog. Could it have been seen as a frog effigy, or a shape changer maybe, since it shares different faces? A split-filled singing boulder? It seems to have swallowed a tree. The landowner also showed me this low, split-filled boulder form. Two boulders close together, the space between which is filled with smaller stones with obvious intent. This farm strikes me as the epitome of the blended landscape. With a couple of 100 years of farming on top of 10,000 plus years of indigenous living. We're not far from the Connecticut River, a major indigenous corridor going back to time immemorial. As in much of New England, we seem to see hundreds of years of Western-style stonework on top of, altering and adapting thousands of years of indigenous stonework. There are many stone rows here which have the look of originally having been indigenous stonework. Even stone rows marking boundaries and bordering pastures. But think about it. No farmer who came across an old stone row would waste time moving it. They'd use it. And say you were an early settler who found stonework on your land. Given biases, you'd likely have chalked it up to previous failed European settlers. And given the precariousness of land claims, you likely would not mention the stonework you'd found to anyone for fear of losing the land. That's not only plausible, it seems likely, given the survival mode desperation of settlers. This boulder feature is highly degraded. The landowner said the sheep used to mess with this one. They moved stones and disassembled it over time. That's when he told me how useless the low stone walls and stonework was when it came to his sheep, who'd kick it apart and walk over it. Did the people who came up with the idea all these stone walls were built for sheep farming ever, talk to a sheep farmer? There are stone features with strong evidence for being ancient indigenous stonework spread out across this hilly landscape, which sort of tilts the scales when it comes to assessing the rest of the stonework present. They reveal a pre-settler or agricultural indigenous context exists, which should then be considered when evaluating the rest of the stonework here. There's much more stonework to assess and consider here. So much that appears it could be older indigenous stonework. If you want to learn more about the possibly ancient stonework all around us, check out more videos on this YouTube channel, join our Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England Facebook group, read my Ancient Stone Mysteries Substack, or pick up my book, Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England, available everywhere. Learn more at ancientstonemysteries.com. My thanks again to the landowner for inviting me out to see these stone features. I'm Mike Luoma. Thank you for joining me in experiencing these cairn-like stone structures, stone rows, and more on an old hill farm in Orange County, Vermont.